Welcome to the Lightforge podcast. This is Adwicta.
This is Merps. Hello. It's getting a little warm. Things are heating up. So we're going to talk about feelings. Okay.
Mm,
Warm, fuzzy
mm.
feelings.
Are we not
Mostly
going to
just
talk
because,
about the
no, we're
expansion?
not.
We're
No, we're
not
not.
going to talk about the expansion that's coming. We don't know
Well, we do know. It was like leaked or whatever. But
when.
yeah, it's coming.
No official word, but the 11th looks good. That's the update there. But yeah, okay, fine. We're not going to talk about the expansion. We're going to talk
Yeah,
about
actually,
feelings.
don't we like no was there was official word. Yeah,
Oh, is
it's
there
the
an
11th.
official word? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's now
Official word on the
officially
11th now.
the
Okay.
11th.
Okay,
Okay,
great. Because it was very unofficial like a couple days ago.
sure.
Okay, great. Well, now that makes the rest of our schedule good. So if you guys are wondering, the big Lightforge podcast, card review, valuation, all that, that's all happening next Sunday. And we are going to start at the normal 7 o'clock time. We're not going to start early like we normally do because Merps is only going to be there for the first part. We haven't defined what the first part is yet, but then he has to go take care of the baby and stuff. And so the individual card stuff, definitely the class cards, maybe also the neutral cards, or maybe only half the neutral cards. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But it's going to be a solo review. Now, Merps will have reviewed and signed off on all the numbers beforehand. So this is not a solo review in terms of the numbers, but I will be the only one explaining things. And if I'm wrong, Twitch chat is the only one there to correct me, and I may or may not look at Twitch chat. So
You're definitely not looking at Twitch chat. So
it's hard to stream alone. I don't know how people do it. Our cat doesn't even move fast anymore. God, I remember back in the day when it was just flying, and then people are like, people would still respond. Anyway, all that is next weekend. So for now, we don't talk about any of that. No expansion talk. So what are we talking about, Merps? You said feelings and warm feelings.
yeah, it's these things that you don't get. But we're gonna talk about feelings. This is going to be because we're not doing card reviews and card scores. That's all next week. I think it's good to look forward and talk about what we hope to see. And really, what we hope to see boils down to the general principles and fundamental foundational things that you want to see, not just like, oh, I want to see more removal or less removal,
More
right?
mechs.
Sure, you could be a mech gamer. You can want to see all of that stuff. But let's really take it back to the beginning, and we can talk about like in 2014 what we really liked about the game at its core. What is Arena about? What attracted that many people? What got like Hafu and Crip and all those people to really play it and enjoy it that much, such that they chose Arena as their format, and us
Mm-hmm.
too, obviously, little quaint little us. Um, and I think if we can identify that, we can sort of talk about what we can do taking it forward.
Okay.
Because Arena is really different right now. And if you go look at Arena HS, the game is dying, the game is dead, worst meta ever, every meta is worst meta ever. It's a very sky is
no,
falling
no matter
type
which
of
direction they go, every meta is the worst meta ever to somebody, and that's just true.
no skill meta. There's no skill left in any meta,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. I mean, we've
But
been getting a bunch of these on Arena HS. Like one of the top discussions of the last week is: do you also feel like games in the 1-3 win range are the hardest to play? A little bit before that, is it just me or is every opponent's deck just insane these days? Like this is kind of over all feeling now, but it's good to peg it back to 9 years ago, right? Like 9 years ago, more than 9 years ago, in January 2014 was when we started playing Arena. Merp started playing Arena first. Like I downloaded it a week after on his recommendation. I was still like vaguely playing MTGO at the time, and we kind of never looked back from there. That was the open beta. Um, so back then, we started playing. We were playing Constructed. We were playing Arena. We didn't know what we were doing. We were just playing the game, right? But pretty quickly, we both gravitated towards Arena. And trying to think back to what grabbed you about the game at that time. If you are someone who's been listening to us forever or have been playing the games since forever, you knew that when you first saw Hearthstone, And when you first played and felt Hearthstone, that was so gripping, having pretty much nothing to do with the numbers, nothing to do with, what the cards are, whether it's Chowan Yeti or like a Ysera. It was just that the cards were animated, they were moving around, things shook, there was sound, it all felt good, it all felt like what MTGO should have been 10 years ago.
Well,
And
yeah. Well, MTGO felt like a browser game,
yes,
right?
I think
It
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 was a
was,
browser game.
and it was basically, yeah, it was a browser game. It looked terrible. The animations looked like clip art moving around,
Yes.
right? It
Mm-hmm.
was clip art moving around. And this was the card game franchise. So
Like,
you had Blizzard come in, everything looked smooth, everything looked so freaking good. So yeah, I would say that's what initially drew us in, but that is over with. I
mm-hmm.
mean, not over with, but like, Hearthstone can come out with cool voice lines, like nice effects, nice board that you can
Signature
click on,
cards.
signature cards, but that's to be expected now. Nobody is surprised at those. But beyond that, right, what drew us in, I think it was the learning process, right? It was the learning process, and not just sort of, okay, so first cut, whenever you learn any game, there is the sort of like, what is a Yeti, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is like this, or like just the cards. Like somebody drops a card and there's a period of time in which you're like, fire elemental. What does this do? Wow, deals 3 damage when it comes out. That's broken.
Mm-hmm.
There are, that's the first aspect, but the second aspect, and the much slower one, is everyone collectively learning, right? Everyone collectively learning. And I remember this, this like shift altogether, and it happened at like a similar time in which everybody underrated aggro cards for a long
Yes.
time, right? And it was pushed by everybody says it was Trump. It wasn't just Trump. Like everybody really valued value.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there was a shift. I remember Hafu telling me
Yeah.
like she was getting she was doing a co-op with like Koyuki, who is from MTG, and of course like the MTG Pro has like a slightly different perspective, right? He's like, wait, I don't understand why you guys aren't drafting abusive sergeants more. It's like it's a 1 mana 2/1 that gives +2/+2 attack to something. He's like, this is way like too
Yeah.
many stats that you should be getting for one
It's
mana.
normal
Mana.
statted back in the day when Yeti was really good, right? Like this was a
Yeah.
normal statted card that also dealt 2 damage effectively, as long as you had anything on the board that needed the 2 damage. So it was a very light condition. And everybody thought it was just kind of like an okay card. It was known as Abusive Sergeant at 2/1 back then, was known as the only playable one drop. Like the only one you would ever consider putting in your deck. And
Yep.
and not a premium card by far.
So this was and then he's like, yeah, I don't understand why you Hearthstone players hate on abusive sergeant so much. He's like, why don't you just draft all the time? And then she realized, she was telling me, she's like, I realized my response wasn't like that good.
Yeah.
Like it was just like, oh, because people just don't draft it. But he's like, okay, just break down the numbers. Like you will see that abusive sergeant, you get much more. And at the end of the day, it's sort of like it's sort of like the analytics in sports.
Mm-hmm.
You can like you can be one of those purists and be like, well, it's about spirit of the game. But if it's like, okay, but if enough of analytics is like so overwhelming and you go with it, you're just going to win, right? You're just going to win. So I love that aspect of it, right? And like GVG came out, and I remember Shady Bunny during that time. He like really pushed aggro and
Mm-hmm.
everything. This was back when I still didn't fully get
This
it,
was
and I
back
had to
when
jump
we
on the
were
train.
like probably in the like of the really good players out there, we were probably in the top 10 percentile of players that played the most aggressively. And we hugely underrated Zombie Chow.
No, no, no,
Like
no, no.
I
You
hugely underrated
you
Zombie
did.
Chow. You underrated Zombie Chow too, not as hard as I did. But we like that was for a completely meta defining game defining card, like that was not met with that reaction necessarily before release. Um,
So yeah,
yeah, and like before that, like that's I remember the fall was when we started, like the early fall was when we started to change our mind about cards like Naturalize. And then by GVG, Naturalize was like a near premium card. And if you guys don't
So
know what Naturalize is, because it's been like gone from the game for so long, that was a druid card with no hard removal that said destroy 1 mana, destroy anything, and then give your opponent 2 cards. Like they draw 2 cards.
yep. So look, what I really liked about it was this collective learning. And there's still learning to do with each expansion that comes out, but let's differentiate it now. I think a lot of the learning has shifted. And I think the key thing with learning, and when I say learning, I mean, if you want to be like a leaderboard player, right? And if you want these things, this is why when adjustments, micro adjusts came out, and we recognized that these micro adjusts were a lot more than just micro adjusts. Um, we've always been outspoken, like very much against, because some of the learning has shifted significantly to outside of the game.
Yeah.
And some of it has to do with very specific interactions now. Now, like in previous metas, the learning had to do with you understanding tempo, you understanding value, getting
The
a feel of
fundamentals.
where you are. Yeah, the fundamentals. Now, do the fundamentals still matter? Of course they matter. Of course they still do. But it's shifted a lot to like you kind of have to know HS replay stats in order to see where the adjustments are because they are not micro at all. Number one, you have to understand specific combo interactions because you're going to see them. And if you don't understand how things work, things have gotten to such a crazy degree that like you really do have to know these, or you should expect to see just some sort of bombs, right? Like you can't just expect like, oh, from one card, like I should expect this. You now have to expect sort of like very easy because of all the discovers, all everything like 2 card combos that can wipe you off the board, all of that stuff, and legendaries that are really not that rare anymore. So all of these things have to be considered, and your win loss determination has shifted more towards these things. And that also leads to kind of, well, what can the game do about this, right? Because the natural response is merps, we are not at the beginning of a game anymore, right? This is the same thing with like BGs, right? You can say like, well, you enjoyed BG so much when it came out because everyone was learning at the same time. And I agree. It's not fair to say you can create an expansion that captures this because everyone understands a lot of what makes tempo, what makes value, and a lot of the learning has to necessarily shift towards memorize the specific combo, right? Sort of remember this big adjustment that they made mid expansion. But that also means, in my opinion, because of the way that structurally they have done Arena for like the past few years, I would like to see a much bigger change such that we can shift back towards everyone have to tinker a little bit, have to figure out these things instead of expansion comes out, new cards come out, and with every expansion, what always ends up happening is there's some intra expansion mechanic that you have to
Mm-hmm.
learn and
Yeah.
memorize. Like it's very, and I get it. You have to sell the expansion. So the expansion has to stand out. It has to have this intra expansion mechanic, right? Like riffs for this expansion. That's one of them, right? Like, well, we can do all these riffs. Finale is just kind of something that fits in, but riffs is like an actual kind of like, oh, like I can chain these riffs together. Um, Instead of just focusing on that and slapping it onto something, I'm hoping that whether or not we see a true Arena 2.0, maybe we do like a cube draft, right? Or like something that is more curated, something that is different than just core plus certain expansions, such that we can shift it back to this more of like everyone collectively has to learn more about the fundamentals than learning about specific combos and how they interact with each other.
Yeah. So to bring it back, the one part of your like summary of what's happened that I really disagree with was that it kind of had to be this way. Like from the very beginning, there were these combos that you're talking about. Maybe not inter like within an expansion or whatever, but they just existed from the very beginning. The old school classic players remember equality consecrate. That was a thing. That was a common thing because equality was pretty good and consecration was an auto pick. So you just got a decent amount of quality consecrates, and it was a 6 mana 2 card combo that even back then, without a lot of card draws, it wasn't that hard to pull off. And you just and it was a 6 mana bomb that blew everything on the board away, which is huge back then. Like back then, Twisting Nether was freaking amazing. And Equality Consecrate was just not fair. And let's be honest, sometimes it's just a card, right? Like Flamestrike was just not fair. Flamestrike was never fair for that era with its power. And but you would know what to do with it because there was a lot of negative space still around. You would know how to play around a paladin because you knew what you were looking for. And the things that you were looking for, they got modified with each expansion in the early going. They didn't fully flip on their heads and totally change. At a certain point, I'm going to say 5 years ago, Blizzard changed the course of how they do expansions. And they didn't do it with Arena in mind because nothing they do is with Arena in mind. So it's just kind of we're the side effect, right? We're the collateral damage or the whatever the positive version of collateral damage is, depending on what happens. And so now every time something comes up, and they started doing rotations too, which was also I never liked rotations from the very beginning. People love rotations. They got to the point where everyone got really annoyed that we were playing with like 20 sets all at once, and I'm like, this is great. And people were like, no, we need very specific, sets in each particular time. This is back before Hearthstone even had that many expansions, and people were just annoyed that you can see any card from anywhere. So they limited it. But once you start doing that, what happens to each set is that every rotation that comes around with every new expansion or even without a new expansion, these interactions between the cards you have to relearn. And in today's meta, when these things are so huge and so game changing, it's equality consecrate everywhere. Like equality consecrate is everything. You have to equality consecrate them 5 times, or rough equivalent of that, and they'll do it to you 6 times to win. So if you don't know an equality consecrate, if you don't know one of the literal 100 equality consecrate equivalents that exist in the game now across 10 classes, and of course you don't know it when you first step into the meta, right? So Mervis talk about like, oh, you gotta like learn the whatever. This is what the learning is now. There's a new learning period that begins every single time they like do a rotation. Except that learning almost never has much to do with the fundamentals and is instead, and developers like this. Like this is the direction they've been pushing it. They're specifically picking sets to make this happen. So that each rotation that comes out, you have to relearn the game, but not the actual fundamentals of the game, because that never really changes that much, and so there's nothing to relearn, and so it's not exciting, so they don't care much about it. And instead, you have to relearn all the equality consecrates. Back in the day, that was 20. You had to know 20 equality consecrates, and you got the entire game of all the crap that could happen that wasn't like too remote that you didn't even need to consider it, right? Like obviously there's super crazy constructed combos, but you never had to consider it in arena because that would happen in like 0.01% of your games. And yeah, you add all of them up, it's going to happen in like 1% of your games, 2% of your games, up to 5% of your games maybe, but you just write it off because you can't possibly know all that stuff. Well, today, you have to know a far greater chunk of that stuff. And that stuff changes every 2 months. So, who's keeping up with that? The people on top of the leaderboard are keeping up with it, right? The top players are keeping up with it. And by top players, I really mean the top players. If you look at the leaderboard right now, there's like a pretty big fall off after a certain point. So, the top players are like the 20 people per, maybe 50 people altogether across all the servers. You know what? They're repeating. They're the same people across all the servers. The 30 people, 30 actual human individual arena players who keep up with the meta can do anything remotely close to figuring the meta out in the first, not the first, we'll just say the entire 2 month period. For everyone else, you don't figure the meta out even at the level of knowing the combos until the very end of the meta, if at all. And so whether you win or lose is less reliant on fundamentals, which is a direction that they picked, and more reliant on these fancy combos that people just don't all know. In fact, almost nobody knows them. Our chat has, I don't know, maybe like 90% of people who don't know much about these combos, and about 10% of people who are the same people on the leaderboards, by the way, who do know all of these very well, and they'll point it out, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a thing. I didn't think about that before because I hadn't seen it because I play like 3 arena runs a week these days. So if you're looking at this in terms of a player who wants to be good but who is not playing like 100 runs a week, it's not the same feeling it was before. It's not the same feeling from before when Merps was talking about everybody discovering how the fundamentals work, and that is a very like that is an exhilarating period in a game's life. But what matters for me also, and why we were doing arena instead of constructed, because I started off playing as much constructed as arena. I made a homespun warrior deck that was janky and like not even aggro. It was, I called it a turn 7 warrior because you win on turn 7 or you lose, and you don't win before that. You just win on turn 7. Like that was 75% of my wins on literally turn 7. And Trump took it to a tournament. I got a lot of upvotes on Reddit. People had some success with it, but it was like a very specific meta deck, right? I was just trying to kill this miracle rogue meta. Like I was
I remember that deck and the specific, of course, you were warrior, you had fiery war axe, but I think the most important tech consideration, the MVP was of that deck was it was a pretty control-ish meta, and
mm-hmm.
what decks during that time tried to do was remove Fairy Dragon was by far the
Yes,
MVP. Fairy Dragon
Fairy
and also
Dragon
Jungle Panther.
Panther. Yep.
Yeah, those were the MVPs of your deck because you did not allow them to interact.
Yes.
So a lot of like Priest was a fairly popular deck during that time. And what they did was they would keep Smite and Shadow Word Pain to deal with opposing small drops such that they can play, other things. And for you, remember Holy Nova was on turn 5, so that was way too late. And these were sort of just the removal options that Priest had. And you essentially, it doesn't matter. Once you got to turn 5, the damage was so you got the damage with the Panther in because you could always go face or you could
Mm-hmm.
trade with it. But the Fairy Dragon
Yeah,
was there and they
all
had no
damage
way
goes
to
face
remove
in
it.
that deck.
Mhm.
Like I would just equip
Yeah.
weapons and throw it to the face, right? Like outside
Yep.
of the first 3 turns where I maybe care about the board a little. It was like a dumb deck, right? But it just worked for the meta. That's the whole purpose of the deck. So I was doing that, and after I got to legend, I think I got to top 100, like 77 or something was my highest, and I was like, all right, I don't want to keep playing this deck. It was not a fun deck to play. Given how limited my options were. So Arena was a lot more attractive because there's all these little variations each time you play. Each time you play, even back in Classic, you would face somebody, they would have a deck. It would not be the same deck. I don't know all the cards in your deck, right? That's the main attraction about Arena. I do not know all the cards in your deck. I do not know any of your combos. You don't know anything about my deck. One of the things I loved about this warrior deck that I homebrewed was that nobody knew anything about this deck. Like until I posted it online, and even then nobody knew because it was never like a popular deck. And it had like I think I had like a 80% win rate, 76%. It was more than 75% win rate. I remember it was some ridiculous thing. On my way to Legend, because it was the anti-meta deck, and the meta was the meta. So um, one of the even playing that deck, one of the biggest advantages was that my opponents would misplay all the time, even people that I assume were good players, because they just didn't know what my deck was supposed to do or what I put in my deck, right? So they would make like one mistake that would cost them 4 life, and then that would be over. But that if they knew what my deck was or faced me again, they would just win that game. So again, it's a janky deck. It's not like the most brilliant deck ever created, but that's something I really enjoy. That your opponents don't know what you have. And now what Hearthstone has done in Arena is to keep that same. My opponents don't know what I have in my deck, but they're not getting there through the draft anymore. All the drafts are very similar outside of maybe legendary bombs. I'm pretty sure I know what my opponents have, right? Like, especially if you study HS replay, you know what your opponents have. Your opponents know what you have. Not just what is possible for you to have, but a pretty good idea of what the actual cards are in your deck. That's terrible. I remember when we were like doing like tournaments and like promo stuff and whatever, we were like, I mean, speaking of Hafu, we got invited to like a Red Bull event where it was like a team, vaguely drafty, sealed kind of event. And one of the things that they didn't do anything about the rules up front. Like it wasn't like fully ironclad, I guess. And so one of the things they try to figure out is, hey, do we let people look at each other's decks or not beforehand? Right? Like, is this open submission deck or was it not? And as arena players, me and Merms were like, no, you can't look at our decks. That's our whole, like, if we're building a sealed deck, that's our whole, like, strategy going there. And all the constructive players were like, yeah, of course you look at their decks. Why? Because people just cheat anyway. And we're like, whoa, you can't just rely on people to not cheat? This is, by the way, for, like, I don't know, I think the winner got, like, did the winner even get 1,000? It was like $1,000 split
I don't know.
amongst
It
three
was
of
for
you or
like
something.
bragging rights.
Yeah, it was not
No,
really for
this
like
was.
any serious amounts of like money compared to the fact that you had to take a trip to LA to do this and all that.
I remember this, and it was first of all when it came up, I was like, "Wait, this wasn't like considered beforehand." But no, this was a very contentious thing, and I remember this is like I can look overall. I got nothing to say, nothing negative to say about like that's admirable. Who, as you guys know, is a caster, but I was shocked and appalled that this was his stance. Like he was very much against. He's like, of course you release
Hmm.
the uh the um
The,
the
the
deck
deck
list,
list.
and then it makes sense. He's like a constructed guy,
Yeah,
right, through and through.
yeah.
He doesn't know about arena. He's like, of course you release the deck list, and then our team, the arena player, we were like, of course you do not release it
And
because
his reason was just 100% super clearly people would cheat otherwise.
people will. And I remember all of us, we were so incredulous. We're like, it's because you believe people will cheat anyways. Like, wait, what? What is this? Um, and he like no, it was just a case of and I've never seen such a disconnect
Yeah,
where
it's like
we
culture
thought
shock.
he was insane.
Yeah,
He thought we were
yeah.
insane. And he's just like, obviously people are gonna cheat anyways. Why are you guys so dumb as to
Yeah.
want to hide like it got a little bit contentious and I will say look, I have nothing bad to say about him otherwise, and he does a good job casting. But during that time, I was like, this is such the dumbest decision that somebody I think is smart is making. Like
Well, but he's making it
yeah.
practically. But more importantly, I don't think he like he just didn't appreciate what not seeing the deck adds to like the dimensions of the game for both the
Yeah,
viewer
right.
and for the person playing to that degree. Or maybe it was just like so like foregone conclusion that people would cheat anyway, and that we would be the only ones who wouldn't know other people's decks. That he's just like trying to save our asses, right? But regardless, that's what one of the things that was really good about Arena for me was that nobody ever knew my deck. They have like vague ideas of what could possibly be in my deck, but they didn't know my deck, and that got more and more to be true as more and more cards were added to the arena, and so arena kind of got better and better. Even as arena got more tilted one way or the other, even as some of the problems of what happens when you start adding more, cards that go really far in one direction or the other direction, or power creep, all that stuff. But all the way through like year three, that was all going in a positive direction because more and more people don't know what's in your deck. More and more, it's just about possibilities and your execution of it and what cards you were given by the powers that be, by the RNGs that exist inside Blizzard's algorithm. That all mattered, and then they took all that away. They took all that away, and they backstopped it to kind of give you that fake feeling with Discover, because
Yeah.
I don't know what's in my opponent's deck either. It's Discover. It could be anything, right? It's that kind of same feeling that you're getting. Except, unlike it being part of my deck, now my deck doesn't really have as much of an identity with that stuff because Discover is Discover whatever happens in the game, right? So did you solve this problem in Constructed where everyone knows everyone's decks, and now you brought that feeling in that you don't really know what's in their hand anymore because they discovered something? Yes, you fully solved this problem. Great Constructed move. What's happening in Arena? You've destroyed by limiting the card pool and making doubles of like a lot of the like good cards. Like in a lot of metas before they nerf the offering rates, you can just expect 1 to 2 of whatever the best card is in that good classes deck always, every single meta, right? Like without fail. You've destroyed that in Arena, And Discover is like a poor substitute. It's like a poor man's version of what Arena already had. So you took away the real thing and you gave us something crappier and you fed it to us like, hey, this is actually better. But what you really mean is that this is actually better for constructed. Because the mindset of going in thinking is from that constructed lens.
This is and look, I understand that it'll never be the same as it was in 2014, 2015, etc. But if you guys remember playing Arena back then, and you got 12 with a deck, not only did it feel cool because you at that point you hadn't gotten so many 12s yet, but there was like a more of a connection between you and your deck,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because your deck didn't generate all of this stuff yet.
Yes, your
You
deck
were
was the same
playing
game
these
after
cards.
game.
It was this thing. Yeah, it was this concrete thing, and you played your deck. The opponent played their deck.
Mm-hmm.
Generation was just not a thing. There was card draw, right? Cult
Yeah,
Master into like card draw.
yeah.
Ooh, but
There was
like
some
Cult
bad
Master,
random
right?
cards, but
So you did feel more of a connection to your deck, which meant you feeling
yeah.
like the draft mattered more. And the draft still matters and everything, but now it's kind of like, and look, this will be the closing chapter because they're retiring Ash and Pikachu, and Pokemon is
Ah,
moving on, right? Like Ash is gone after being 12 years old for like the past 25 years. But it's it's like, and here's the thing, right? Ash is kind of an idiot because he lets go of his Pokemon, but he kept Pikachu during the entire time. He kept Pikachu, and it's because like he wants to win and he wants to feel good that he won his dumb
mm-hmm.
idiotic way, right? With
Yes,
Pikachu. And when he wins, he always embraces Pikachu and he's like, "We did it, buddy!" Like that was us.
that's
And
what I
that counts
did
for
with
something,
my
right?
dumb warrior deck in constructed.
Right.
I made you with my stupid fairy dragons and my stupid jungle panthers, and no one was using because they objectively sucked. And I found a way to make the best of this and make it actually really excel in that meta. And that's what I want to do in Arena. That's the feeling where you take this deck. It's not your selection, right? It's not a sealed game even. It's an Arena game. Your selection is really kind of limited. But still, whatever is given to you or you select, that little mix creates your deck. There is way
Right.
less of a feeling of your deck in these not even like current modern metas, even like the pre-modern, the last modern meta before the latest power creep from the colossal patch from like a year and a half ago. Even before that, the 3 years before that was already gone. Like it was once Discover was really integrated into the system, and they moved into these possible wild rotations. It changed the whole dynamic.
Yep. So this is where we're at. Like right now, when you draft something, yeah, it's your deck, but where's a lot of the power coming from? A lot of the power is just coming from what your deck can produce, not what your
Yes.
deck is. It's what your deck is, but what your deck will
And
produce.
what it's
Um,
producing is another round of randomness, right? Because if my deck, if I have something that like always gave me arcane bolts, for example, that's just part of my deck. But if I have something that gives me discover a spell, that discovered spell is part of any deck. It's part
yeah.
of every deck. It's not mine anymore. And like,
Okay.
I don't know, do you when you win with a Scorpid deck, do you really feel like you have a good connection with your Scorpids? No, they're like hired guns. Like even though they sit in your deck, they're hired guns because the Scorpion's only doing what an Emperor Cobra does from back in the day. What its real power is not a spell that it generates, and that it's not really the Scorpion. Just like when it gets used on you, that spell, you don't feel like oh no, the Scorpion screwed me, or at least most people don't. When you win with it, also you're like, is it the Scorpion? Like yeah, the Scorpion technically did it, but it's not. It's not the deck.
All right. So look, that's what we're hoping to see from this year. And it's not an easy ask, and it's not
No,
a
no,
specific
no,
ask.
no, no.
No, no,
It's
no.
it's not. This is not like a hey devs do this, right? We have enough of that. This is
But
a think about this.
yeah, think about this. But this is also why people are calling for a Hearthstone 2,
Yeah,
right? And not just not just from us, from like constructive people as well, because people inherently understand. This is also why BGs, when it first came out, captured everybody's attention, right? And holy shit, do you guys remember the first time you learned how to properly play Daryl? You're like, whoa, right? Like, whoa, this is
uh,
crazy. or learn the Yogg curve the first time, you're like,
The
of
yacht curve
course,
was
that
cool.
makes so much
Daryl was
sense.
way too janky. Like Daryl was just like hacking the game. It did not feel that fun to me. But the yacht curve was cool.
The Yogg curve was cool, and you immediately like understand. Like you learning that also made you understand the game more.
Yes.
You understanding the
Yes.
game more made you understand the hero powers more, and it was like, whoa, this is crazy. So it's not an easy ask, but I think in some way, shape, or form, we have to tilt it back to that sort of learning and not parrot meta, scorpid meta learning.
Hmm.
Okay?
And clearly that's not what's happening right now, which is why Mertz's
No.
proposal is some kind of Arena 2.0, or whatever. Because you have to rely on constructed cards, right? That's the whole point. They're not going to make new cards for Arena, or if they do, like that's just a lot of resources. They have resources to put into it. Like if you're going to spend that resources in Arena, you have better places to put it within Arena than making new cards. I strongly believe that. I know people love the Arena only cards. I've always hated them because they were always bullshit and they used up way too many resources that really wanted to be spent on the core of Arena. So the core of Arena is I'm not going to say it's dead, but it cannot be the same again, and it cannot be better because it has lost way too much of what made it Arena in the first place, and that is somewhat the fault of Arena decisions, but it's really mostly the fault of constructed decisions. And if you can't divorce Arena from Constructed because of financial reasons, I don't think they can, um, then you just got to change the rules of Arena to capture that feeling again and to reward that kind of discovery that Merps is talking about and that kind of like deck identity that I'm talking about. Like we gotta get back to what makes this limited format with a deck, right? Because what Arena is now, is it still a limited format? Yes, it's a very limited format in the way that Battlegrounds is a limited format. Like, if anything, Arena is becoming a little bit more like Battlegrounds, where you select your class and that's what happens. Not you select your class, you draft a deck, and your deck is what happens. Right? Instead, you're just always going to battle with a mage deck in this meta of, rank power 3 to 8 or whatever, depending on how good of a deck you get. And it shouldn't be like that. Like that's a big loss to what makes Arena feel good and feel special, and why a lot of people were attracted to Arena in the first place.
Okay. I think that's it.
All right. Well, that's it for us today. We're gonna make this a quick podcast because the next one is gonna be long. So come back on Sunday to watch it live, or wait for it on YouTube. It'll be live on YouTube Monday or Tuesday morning latest, with all the numbers. Well, not numbers anymore. I mean, there are numbers. We just don't tell them to you because they're not. They're kind of fuzzy. All the tier list ratings and analysis from me, and analysis of the most important neutral cards in meta, or whatever the first part is, from Merps as well. Until then, this
Bye.
is Adwick Dub.
Bye.